Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to see you all here. We might be expecting a couple of other legislators, but I would like to go ahead and get started for today's legislative update. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Bloomington, Monroe County, and the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce, please welcome to the second session of the 2020 legislative updates. My name is Mary Morgan. I'm Director of Advocacy and Public Policy for the Chamber, and I'm also a League member. I will be moderating this session. Ralph Shaw, co-chair of our Voter Service Committee, is our question moderator. I would also please remind you to turn off your video and mute your audio as we get started. This morning, our local legislators will report on their work and priorities for the current session of the Indiana General Assembly. They'll each have up to 10 minutes to do that. And after that, we will welcome questions from the audience. At any time during the session, you can alert the question moderator on chat if you have a question, and she will put you in the queue. You'll be recognized in the order in which you submit a question, and you'll be asked to unmute and turn on your video when it's time to pose your question. Please do not use chat for conversations, as that makes it difficult for our question monitor to keep track. Please limit your question to 1 minute. Our timer will give a little chime when 10 seconds are left. If you have additional questions, please hold them in reserve. After everyone has a question and they've had the opportunity to ask it, additional questions will be allowed if time remains. Posing a question constitutes your permission to be recorded by CATS. And I'll note that that stands for Community Access Television Service, not the cat filter that's been in the news so frequently. This morning is intended to be an informative session, an opportunity to get an update from our legislators. It is not a time to make public statements or to engage in debate. Please frame your questions to elicit information for the benefit of all of us and to enable any of the legislators to weigh in. You may agree or disagree with the legislators' comments, but we ask you to be respectful. For our legislators, each of you will have an opportunity to answer a question, and we'll have about 2 or 3 minutes to answer. And I'll call on you when we get to that point in rotation, so it's not always the same person answering first. All righty, now we're ready to get going. Would our legislators please start their videos and unmute if you haven't already? And hello, everyone. This morning, we would like to welcome, let's see, who do we have here? Matt Pierce. Welcome, Representative Matt Pierce. He represents District 61. We have State Senator Shelley Yoder representing the 40th Senate District. Good to see you. And I don't believe I see any of our other legislators on here, although I believe Peggy Mayfield will be joining us soon. Who would like to start this morning? Shelley, how about we start with you?
I'll go first. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, League of Women Voters, and to the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. It's great to be here and on this cold Saturday morning. I wanted to just give a little bit of an update of what it's been like as a new legislator joining the Senate and where we are in this cycle. So we've got 1 more week of hearing Senate bills before we push the pause button briefly, and then we switch, and the House bills that have passed will come over to the Senate and be assigned to committees, and we'll be able to hear those. So next week will be very busy, and we will be finalizing what the Senate will be hearing from the Senate side. My priority when I started was really to make sure that we had paid attention to the safety nets that should be there and strong to help families and workers during a frightening time. And for my priorities, I had a family leave bill. I had a bill that offered child care tax credits, a work share program, and a prohibit from asking work salary, history, and of all of those bills, I joined another senator, a Republican, Senator Bassler from Washington, Indiana, and he also offered a work share program. I joined his bill, and that will not be seeing the light of day in this session. And a work share program is something that I know the Chamber has been supportive of, as well as labor has been supportive of. And this would be an opportunity for employers to work with the state and with workers when there's an economic downturn to be able to work out a plan so they can keep their employees on at a certain level. If they're usually full-time and they can only pay them 20 hours a week, they could work it out with the state to have 20 hours on keeping them on the job and then make up the rest through unemployment. But that has not been a priority of the state thus far, and it doesn't look like it's going to be this year. My child care tax credit, that is not going to be heard this session, but I'm going to soldier on because I think it's incredibly important. And it is a priority of folks like the Working Families Institute, as well as the Chamber. And I think that it's something that we are seeing is incredibly important to families. When COVID hit, so many families recognized the importance of having that assistance. And I've also prioritized the environment. I had filed a couple of bills, a time of transfer, looking at at what point do we look at septic systems when they're failing, because that is contributing to our wastewater, and also a drainage code update. I've gotten some traction with the drainage code update, and it does look like a little bit of my legislation will be making its way to the House at some point in the next week. So that's been interesting, and it really did bring home, when you hear that metaphor of the sausage making, it has been a complete sausage making experience in trying to get some of the drainage code addressed and worked through at least the Senate. And I've been pretty frustrated with some of the environmental bills that we have heard and what we haven't heard. 389 has made its way to the House side, and that is the deregulation of all isolated wetlands in Indiana that are not protected by federal regulation. And so that's been something that we should all be paying attention to, as well as a bill that we'll be hearing this next week in the Environmental Affairs Committee, and that is environmental nuisance bill that is problematic. And I hope everybody sort of tunes in and watches the hearing on that bill. So that's some of my priorities and things that I'm watching out for. I'll hand it over to Representative Pierce. And it's been great to be a colleague of Representative Pierce at the State House, although we haven't had too many opportunities to see each other or work together, but we're just getting started. I'm just getting started. And I hear a lot of good things coming out from everyone. It's like, you should talk to Matt Pierce about this. So I'm thankful for his leadership, and I'll pass it over to him at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelley. And it's been interesting to see how quickly you've been adjusting to this new crazy world of the legislature, which can't really be accurately described to people on the outside. So as you know, you have to kind of just be in the middle of it. So it's been great to watch you kind of adjust so quickly to it all. And one thing that people probably don't realize is, even though under normal times now we've got this COVID set up, so the House is meeting mostly in a government office building next door to the State House, or even further apart. But even when we have regular sessions where we're meeting just across the hallway, there's just not much of an occasion to go back over until you get to a certain part of the session where you have conference committees. Then you start maybe going over to the Senate and interact with people. Everybody's kind of in their two pods in the Senate and the House, so that makes it different, which is why it's interesting to me that, a lot of people hear about, for example, Senate bills like wetlands bill. It's very concerning, and they'll start emailing us, and it's kind of like, hey, we're over here in the House. We got our big pile of bills we got to work on. We can't really be worrying about the Senate bills yet because we don't know what exactly is going to get here. So over in the House, I guess the big thing is the budget is now beginning to kind of come into focus. So the budget has to start in the House of Representatives. I should also mention that we're coming up on the halfway point of the legislature. So all of the bills have to be voted out of committees by Tuesday the 16th. It's coming up this Tuesday. Then all the bills have to be passed the second reading or amendment on the House floor stage by the 18th, which is Thursday, I think. And then finally, all bills with the current schedule must be passed out of the House by February 22nd, which I think is a week from Monday. So we're in this really busy last week kind of stretch drive where committee chairs are trying to cram in the last few bills they can get out of committee. You get really long calendars in the House floor with lots of amendments. You tend to have more and more time on the floor. And then once we get past third reading, then it's like a little bit of a halftime. It's almost like a football game or basketball game or something. There's half a week off, basically, and then you come back and the House will begin to work on the Senate bills and the Senate will begin working on the House bills. So the budget kind of coming out is interesting. I haven't had a chance to really look through it and absorb it. I wouldn't be surprised if it's amended a little bit more. And of course, the Senate will probably completely rewrite the House version. And then at the end of April, there'll be a conference committee and a few people will get together and they'll decide what that budget's going to look like. So we got a long way to go there. But the thing that is really got me most concerned and maybe frustrated is what's going on with education in this budget, because they're touting an increase for education, but a big chunk of that is going to go to a pretty massive, I think, radical expansion of vouchers and other kind of education savings account schemes, all designed to funnel taxpayer money to private schools or religious schools. And it's not really going to be sustainable, I don't think, in the long run to continually expand the subsidization of private schools when you're not really getting the job done for the public schools. And really proof of that is there's absolutely nothing in there other than, I think, a small existing grant program a year ago on teachers' salaries. The chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, I heard him make a comment that, basically teachers' salaries are a local school board decision. So that, to me, seems to be signaling that the legislature has just thrown up its hands and will do nothing on teacher pay, despite how pathetic it is. At the same time, they're willing to find millions and millions of dollars of money to go to these private schools. So that's something that it will be interesting to see how that plays out over time. That to me is a really kind of stark contrast where, no money for teacher pay, but more money for private vouchers and maybe even the creation of a new tax benefit for people who send their kids to private school. So that's a difficulty. Now, and that's also, I guess, in House Bill 1005 would outline these kind of expanded vouchers where I think you could get up to have a family up approaching $150,000 a year in income getting these subsidies. And so that's another thing that's interesting, too. If you go back and you retrace this voucher movement back a decade or so, it started out as a program that was supposed to be targeted at low-income, often minority students in urban schools that they said were failing them. And the idea was that if you were in an urban school or public school and it didn't meet your needs, then after a year, the parent would then have the option to get one of these vouchers and move to a private school. And it was billed as some kind of civil rights movement in that regard. And what we really found out is that was just to get the foot in the door. And it's just been expanding and expanding and expanding. And now it's going to be expanded to people who have never been in the public schools. Public schools may serve them perfectly well, but they just, for whatever reasons, maybe religious reasons, prefer to send their kids to a private school. And we're going to be subsidizing all of that now. So it's a pretty radical expansion, in my opinion. Now, the other thing that's going on with the schools, which is kind of interesting, is there's a real step back from some of these core accountability, so-called accountability provisions that were put into the code for schools. So remember, we had this point where super emphasis on testing. Testing was going to determine whether or not we thought the teachers were good. Testing was going to tell us whether or not the schools were good. If the schools didn't meet a certain threshold with the testing, then they would be put on probation have these kind of various sanctions or requirements. And in fact, they even took over a few schools. They kind of declared them failing, and they had the state come in and take them over. Well, the powers to be have finally figured out that that was a complete bust. So they've got a bill moving that's going to basically de-emphasize the testing a bit. It's essentially getting rid of all these sanctions or punitive things that could result from testing. You're still going to have that A through F grading thing, so they'll still have the scarlet letter of schools going on. But they're backing off from a lot of it, and their argument is that we're just going to create a lot of new metrics or new data that can be published and made available, and they think that'll be more transparent and perhaps better for the parents to figure out how their schools are doing. So, that's a positive advancement, but it's just taken too long for them to reach that conclusion. Now, some people might look at that and think like, well, maybe what's really going on here is as we're going to expand further and further into private schools, maybe we don't want to risk the situation where you might have the state having to declare a private school as failing or not getting the job done, and then maybe having those kick in. So part of me wonders if this kind of general movement toward the idea that we're just going to hand money to parents and let parents go out and find a school that they like, I think that kind of push toward that kind of system might explain why they're backing off on this idea of this very kind of paternalistic state oversight of our local schools. So we'll have to kind of see how that plays out. That's 1514, by the way, is the school accountability changes. So House Bill 1002 and Senate Bill 1 have already passed the House, and I think Senate Bill 1 will probably just get approved by the Senate on a concurrence vote. That's the impression I'm getting. Those, by the way, are the employer immunity bills. And I've got a problem with those bills because 1002 was just definitely way too broad. The way it was written, I think it was much too expansive. So the idea started out with, if you have a restaurant or something and it's open, you don't want them to have to fear they're going to get sued and someone's going to say, hey, your restaurant gave me COVID. Now, if you talk to attorneys who practice in this area, they say it's like practically impossible to prove where you got COVID. So they think it's not very likely you would ever prevail in that kind of suit. But some people said, well, it'll add some comfort to these businesses that they will have some immunity from these potential types of lawsuits. So I was hoping that there could be a narrowly crafted bill that perhaps I could support. The House bill definitely was not it. Senate Bill 1, they did a much better job. Their bill was much narrower. But the interesting thing was, in the Senate version of that bill, it came over to the House. It had a provision that said that nothing in a bill granting these immunities would affect the duty of care or the standard of care in nursing homes. Because, nursing homes, medical facilities, they have what's called a standard of care. And if you violate that, then you can be sued for malpractice. Well, the House decided that that provision couldn't be in the Senate bill, so they took it out. And so we've got to, you never know what's going to happen with these bills until the courts actually start adjudicating them. But I think that we've got a problem in that the immunity extends to anything you're doing that's arising from COVID. So one particular example is, okay, let's say someone is in a nursing home, they fall out of bed, they're injured on the floor, and they end up laying there for a day because nobody checked on them. Well, under normal circumstances, you'd say, well, that's a violation of the duty of care. You can't leave somebody laying on the floor for 24 hours. Well, now, if this bill passes, I think the nursing home will be able to say, well, that whole thing arose from COVID-19 because I had nursing staff, I had staffing problems due to COVID, so I had to have less people there, and we couldn't check on everybody the way we might normally do. And that might be kind of a get out of free jail card on that one. So I just couldn't, in good conscience, support that because I think that it might lead to a lesser quality of care in our nursing homes. Another bill related to COVID-19, House Bill 1123, tries to get at this issue of the governor's powers. As you know, there are a lot of people in the legislature who don't like the things that the governor's done, and they've really wanted to strip him completely of his powers. The leadership in the House doesn't appear to want to go that route. And so they've passed a bill that does one thing that I support, and that is attempts to create a mechanism where the legislature has to get into session in order to respond to the emergency. And so what the bill would essentially say is if the governor renews his emergency order for a second 30 days, then there would have to be an emergency session of the legislature if the leaders of the legislature decided they needed one. So it's kind of this flexible types of thing. That provision, I think, is reasonable because I had a lot of people contacting me during the beginning of this pandemic about a lot of things they thought the government needed to be doing. And as a legislator, I had no way to make any of that happen. I couldn't introduce a bill. I couldn't file an amendment. I couldn't talk to colleagues and say, let's get this law passed because the legislature is not in session. So the best I could do is pass that suggestion on to the governor and hope that he might act upon it. So I think that is not a bad part of the bill. Now it's going to probably get challenged or may come under scrutiny because some people feel the Constitution says only the governor can call a special session. So whether we can call something called an emergency session and do that under statute, I don't know. There'll be some kind of litigation on that perhaps in the future. But there are two parts of the bill that I thought were very problematic that I could not support. The first is it would say that there could not be any public health requirements that affect churches and their worship. So in other words, if the local health department, if the governor's executive order decides that we have to limit gathering of people in order to prevent these super spreader events, under this bill, if it becomes law, there would be no power to limit those gatherings. And so you may very well have a bunch of super spreader events. Now, there is no doubt that the right to worship is a core fundamental right in both our state and federal constitution, and it needs to be respected, and you need to tread very carefully in that area. But the U.S. Supreme Court has already been issuing cases on this. And, you know, the bottom line is you just have, if you're treating churches the same way you're treating other places where people gather, so you're not creating special separate rules for them, that is a constitutional thing that you can do. So to me, as long as you're treating all gatherings, all rules about how people might get together in a pandemic, it seems to me we ought to allow that to happen. So that was a difficult thing as well. And then the second thing they put in the bill is if a county health department wants to enact some provisions that are stricter than what the governor has done, they will now, under this bill, would have to go to the county commissioners and get their approval for that. Now, I admit that seems kind of appealing because, yeah, who wouldn't want to have elected officials kind of involved in this decision making? The problem is, I think that as we've seen in the way this pandemic's played out, that creates an opportunity for a lot of politics to get injected into decision making. So instead of having health officials really understanding the CDC guidance and getting involved in, scientifically what's the best thing to do, now it's going to have to be a political calculation as well. I see Mary appearing. Am I hitting my time limit here?
Yes, you are. We could listen to you all day, Matt, for sure. Okay. But yeah.
All right, we'll pick things up in the Q&A then.
All right. Thanks so much. And I see Representative Jeff Ellington of District 62 has joined us. Thanks for coming, and please give us about a 10-minute update on your work in the legislature. Thanks.
To
unmute
the house, so I had to what? Am I on mute?
No,
Can you
you're
hear
good.
Me now?
You just froze, but you're good now. Thanks.
Well, I keep saying where I live at down here, right at the edge of Bloomington, AT&T is just terrible on their service. A community of 60,000+, and I think somebody disappeared.
Well, Jeff, now you're mute.
I'm sorry. My service down here is just terrible. I gotta walk around and find a window.
Well, would you like us to go to?
You can go. Yeah, go to somebody else. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. And now we have Representative Peggy Mayfield, who's joined us from District 60. Thanks for joining us. And we've got about 10 minutes for an update from you. Thanks.
Okay, so are we still like in the introduction phase?
Yes, we got 10 minutes. For just a kind of a general overview of your work so far, and then we'll take questions after you go and after Representative Ellington goes.
Okay. Well, I was on another forum from 8:30 to 9:30, but we had technical problems there too, so we didn't get started, which kind of pushed me late onto this one, so I apologize. It's been a really strange session. You know, usually the State House is just a beehive of activity, and it's almost like a ghost town. So it's making communication and very difficult. You know, the Senate being able to stay in the chamber and in the State House, but the House has to go all the way over to the Government Center. And when we caucus, it's in a different building altogether. So it's almost like being on a college campus. Make sure you take everything you need for the next, 8 hours with you, because you can't run back to your desk to get anything. It's just made things awkward and more difficult. With the committees only being able to meet in 2 rooms, it's really cut down on the number of committee hearings and subsequently the number of bills being heard. Staying really busy between my committees of financial institutions and insurance, because we're trying to address healthcare costs more and more in that committee. Ways and Means, of course, is anything that generates revenue, and of course the state budget and public policy. And we always have our typical alcohol and firearms, and trying to think with what else. We're really not tackling much in that committee, but all of the hearings are lengthy because of the subject matter. So as you might recall, 4 years ago, when the Northern Monroe Fire Territory was formed, it was a very rancorous process, and a lot of people contacted me about that. So I had introduced a bill 3 years ago. Finally got it. Well, it's passed the House at least, and will be going to the Senate. But it just kind of smooths out. It doesn't limit the ability for anyone to form a fire territory. It just makes it more transparent, and I think even maybe a little easier in the future for those to happen. So that'll be going over to the House. It passed 93-0, so I'm hopeful if it gets a hearing, it'll pass completely. I'm trying to think of some of the other things I've got going. I've got a BMV bill on second reading on Monday, where I've had a lot of parents. Actually, it was a law enforcement officer who came to me, and he basically said, in 20 years of law enforcement, I've looked at everybody's driver's license, and it's never occurred to me until his 16-year-old daughter went to get her driver's license that address is out there for everybody to see, and that can become a safety issue. So introduced a bill that made it an option, acknowledging that if people want to opt out of having their residence address printed on their driver's license, that they would have to acknowledge that they were not getting a real ID compliant credential. And so I don't think a whole lot of people will take advantage of it, but I think some might. And so that's coming up on seconds on Monday. Trying to think. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit discombobulated coming from one forum to the other. The priorities of the caucus are moving through. We had the Republican amendment for the budget introduced on Thursday. And this is just like step 2 of the process. So it will change significantly as it goes over to the Senate and comes back. I'm trying to think of the changing the TANF requirements has been going through a lot of changes. It's nothing like what was introduced, and we are going to hear that in Ways and Means on Monday. So the last days for committee hearings are Monday and maybe Tuesday morning. And after that, anything that hasn't been heard in the House might have to find a different path if it gets to move forward. I've been watching out for the lit plan. I haven't seen anything yet, so I will keep my eyes out for that. I'm trying to think if there are other specific interests to the Monroe County area in legislation. And just to give you an update on that. But I guess that's all I'm going to offer for now, and I'll leave it open for the questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Jeff, are you ready to go?
We'll see in a few minutes. So basically, you got a little 6-week agenda where we're at in the session compared to where we were last year. As Peggy said, you know, we've got quite a bit of things that's not being heard because of the time constraints. You know, we have less committee rooms, so there's less committees that run through. Time-wise, we do have some bills backing up, you know, on seconds coming Monday. And I'm sure I think we released 40-some bills out of committee reports Thursday. So that'll be, we'll have a pretty busy week next week. But one thing we was able to do, at least the budget made it out of Ways and Means 16-8. You know, it enacts a honestly balanced budget, and revenue will not exceed expenditures. You know, that we'll see a lot of amendments probably going to the floor next week. I would assume different areas for that budget. House Bill 1002, civil immunity, passed out of the House 76-21. So that's now on the way to the Senate. And then 1003 came out, passed the House 93-2, preserves the full school tuition support. And that was done by Slager up in Northwest Indiana. Also had 1004, that was with Lindauer, who's right below me. That passed out of the House 93-3. It just establishes a Hoosier Hospitality Small Business Restart Grant Program. It's about $30 million, and that'll help small businesses in one of the several of the smaller sectors, you know, rebound a little bit from this pandemic. 1005, we're still working out on it. It passed out of Ways and Means 16-8, but there's probably a lot of amendments we'll see in that. And I will say that in 1001, there was an amendment the other day that gave 74% of the dollars, that new dollars, went towards your standard local schools. I think that was a big boost there. 2006 passed the House 96-0. That's the one that deals with upholding the integrity of law enforcement. That was by Storwald. He's done a great job on that. Had a lot of input from a lot of members. 2007, it passed the Ways and Means 13-0, and it's a health grant program. It just establishes a new grant program to fund initiatives aimed at addressing critical health issues throughout Indiana. And the budget for that appropriates $50 million. We also had 1008, the COVID-19 learning losses. That was by Representative Carwall up towards Fort Wayne. That passed the House 94-2. And that establishes a grant program, and it'll provide $150 million to organizations who are providing educational opportunities to the students. And hopefully that'll make up for the learning losses, you know, caused by the pandemic. And then again, 2009, it passed the Family and Children's Committee 10-0, and it just gives some struggling Hoosiers a hand up towards self-sufficiency by exempting income earned. And I always talked about the TANF programs, about those who maybe get a job, they get a raise, get a new opportunity, but they get a little bit in a raise, but then it cuts out all the help. I've always talked about having, you know, a stepping tiered system where it just doesn't drop you out at once. Then there's no incentive to, you know, have that job opportunity to pull yourself up and move forward in the world. So I'm still meeting with individuals that come by my office. Also, I've been speaking with some who cannot by phone. And again, my phone number is 812-327-8118. And then it's, again, my personal email is, take this down, jeffe@bluemarble.net. So I just, between working here at the house on the farm on the weekends, like I say this morning, surprise visit by a skunk in the front yard and gets one of my dogs, and he comes in the house. So we have to get out the Dawn dishwashing detergent, and a couple other chemicals we put in there, baking soda and hydrogen peroxide. That's a good cure. So we get a lot of those mishaps down here. So just looking forward to hear from people. Thank you.
Well, that is very practical information that we just got from Representative Ellington. So thank you for that. Did not expect to learn that this morning, but that's great. Now we're ready for the question part of our session. When you're called by name by the question moderator, please unmute and turn on your video, state your name, and ask your 1-minute question. And we'll start with the order of legislators who'll be answering: Matt, Peggy, Jeff, and Shelley for this first question.
Mary, I think I sent you we had one question that was submitted by email in advance. Do you have that from Jim Bowman?
Okay, I thought we were going to go with the people who were here first, but I will read Jim Borman's question. This is a yes or no question. Do you believe there is true democracy in Indiana with a Republican majority in the Indiana Senate of 39-11 and a 71-21 majority for Republicans in the House of Representatives? If yes, explain why, and if no, explain how the system should be fixed so that it is a representative democracy. So again, we have Matt first, then Peggy, Jeff, and Shelley to take a crack at this. Matt, you're muted.
Yeah, here you go. Okay. So I think you have to say that, yes, there is democracy, but really the more important question is how healthy is our democracy right now? And you just look at what's going on at a federal level and you just, there's just a lot of problems. And I don't know how we're going to tackle that. It has to deal with social media and a lot of other stuff. But I do think that there are systemic things that are making the legislature less reflective of the state as a whole. And, you can start with redistricting as one, where, whoever the majority party is, to the victor go the spoils. And so they get to shape these districts to maximize their votes. And so we saw a legislature for a couple decades that would kind of flip back and forth in control here or there. I think that maybe the biggest margin between the two parties was maybe before that was like 55-45 and maybe 1992. And then we had the last redistricting in 2011, and it jumped up from, I think at that point it's maybe like 43 Democrats. It went down to like 29 Democrats. Over a decade, it climbed back up to 33 Democrats. And then last election, it shrunk back down to 29 again. So I think that's number one kind of issue. Another area that I think could strengthen democracy is some campaign finance reform. We have a lot of dark money in the system. Now, some of that's because of rulings by the U.S. Supreme Court, so it will be interesting to see how I could work around that. But we don't have the transparency we could have. I mean, you can take your money instead of giving it directly to candidates and having that show up on campaign finance reports. You can give huge sums of money to 501c4s like a Chamber of Commerce, State Chamber of Commerce, and other groups that are formulated sometimes just to funnel the money. And then they can turn around and they can give that money, and you have no idea. The voter has no idea of knowing where the voting's actually coming from. So I think those are the two things that I would work on. Is I would have a nonpartisan redistricting commission, which is still enough time to do that, and then also I would get more transparency in the campaign finance system.
Okay, great. We have Peggy next.
I think overall, yes, we do have a very democratic process. If you're talking about true democracy, there are checks and balances built into that, but it is what the people have voted for. Now, throughout our state's history, we've swung back and forth on the majorities, the over 70 on one party to both parties at different times in our history. And we've even had a couple of times when it's a 50-50 split and they had, co-speakers. So it's when it's closer, I think it does drive the legislators to more closely consider the legislation when they have a little bit more freedom if the margins are wider. But just because you have that majority doesn't mean that you can always push through legislation of the one party's thoughts. And that happens on both sides. Well, hopefully it happens on both sides. There have been a lot of bills filed that have not been taken up that we could have. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. So, we could have pushed through an agenda essentially without a single Democrat even showing up. But that's not the way to run a state. And the pendulum always swings back the other way when it results in bad policy. So we try and be very thoughtful of trying to balance when the public has chosen a majority of Republicans versus how much power that actually, you can wield with that. And you really have to create that balance. But I do think that it's working pretty well. I do think that we have a pretty good democracy.
Thanks, Peggy. Jeff?
Yes, I think democracy really is at work here in Indiana. The issue we've had by, I would say, giving the Senate such a large margin in the House is really Southwest Indiana, now Southeast Indiana, or Democrat areas, 20, 30 years back. You've seen an erosion, you might say, of probably union type jobs moving out, and those companies, once they shift out of that market, you have community members that move back out of those areas back to their home states or other counties. It's sort of, what do you want to try to do? Because we have, like I want to say 80+% of the county elected offices throughout the state are Republican. And a lot of that's been shifting over the last 20 years. Take my district, for example. It was a tooth and nail district many years ago, and the line hasn't changed hardly any, but yet it's went from a toss up to maybe a 19% in my race. One is because I think different state legislators, our senators, have been really with the community, taking a lot of input. So it's going to be kind of hard to really take the maps and give, a 80-20 split. Right now, there's my constituents, some of them say that the Democrat Party is really overrepresented in the House and the Senate based upon those county elections. But, you have some larger metropolitan areas such as Bloomington and New Albany and South Bend and Indianapolis now that's shifted also. So I think the population has moved. I think it all has to do with really policy. The last maps that were adopted were adopted on bipartisan support. They took communities into aspect and paid attention to make sure we kept communities whole. They kept interest whole. There was no big long lines of districts like that were in the past. They're a little more compact as best we can. Our district line, I would say, I've been told if you take the outside of your districts and calculate the miles, ours has almost 3,000 less miles in those patterns of districts, which means we're trying to keep them a little more compact with communities. So I think those who voted for those maps in the past and the setup, it's never been contested in the courts because it's such a great drawn map. So I just think it's really about who wants to control what politically. And that's what most of the talk has been about the last 8 to 9 years.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Shelley?
Well, thank you for that question. I think I agree. Oh, I appreciate what Representative Pierce was saying, and I agree there. And certainly Representative Mayfield brought some nuance to it. And Representative Ellington. I'm going to take it in a different direction just because, I don't want to repeat, but it's interesting how democracy can be undermined in really nuanced ways. And we were talking about even the transparency of how the dollars that get assigned to the legislation, to the legislature, and how staff and or communication gets spent. And there's really a lack of transparency. Being in the minority party, we really have no idea how those dollars get allocated and what they get spent on. And it would be nice to have that transparency, because I think more transparency leads to greater democracy. I will give a shout out to the Hoosier Press Association. I mean, they're showing up to those committee meetings and doing, all they can to make sure that First Amendment rights are protected, whether it's a threat to open door laws or, again, transparency, that what's being talked about and possible legislation is as democratic as possible. And for the most part, it's been frustrating because I've heard that in Indiana, like 40% of Indiana are Democrats and 60% Republicans, but in representation, we certainly don't see that. And it needs to be sort of highlighted that what seems to be being undermined is our local papers. I mean, I appreciate the League of Women Voters and the chamber for having events like this, but we need our local papers to be highlighting what's happening. Like this morning, we had one page in the paper really highlighting that. So I just want to give a shout out to people like Dave Askins, who's working his tail off in trying to highlight what's happening locally. And we're fortunate to have him and the Bloomingtonian to find different ways of making sure that we are lifting up democracy, and that is being reflected at the State House. I think it's alive and well for the most part, but it's a real struggle. And what doesn't get communicated are all the little ways that I see Hoosier voices being undermined and silenced. So it's not a clear yes or no, but I think the discussion this morning on this question has been really good. So thanks for that question.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for all these different perspectives. Ralph, do we have our next question lined up?
Yes, we do. So Destiny, would you please unmute and tell us what's going on?
Good morning. This question is for Representative Mayfield. You introduced House Bill 1555 to repeal the bipartisan Indiana Commission for Women this session. Would you mind explaining your intentions behind repealing the commission, and if that bill would have been successful, where those services on behalf of women and their families would have gone? Thank you.
Sure. Hang on, let me just get the video back on here. Actually, I serve on the Commission for Women, and I have for several years. The question wasn't, should the Commission on Women exist? And it was never really the intent to abolish it so that all of the services disappear. It was a culmination of several years of frustration because it is a commission under the Civil Rights Commission. The Commission for Women has no control over what they do or who works on their staff or anything. So the fellow commissioners, and this isn't my idea, I am acting on behalf of my fellow commissioners on the Commission for Women. So essentially, for the past, I think I was appointed in 2014. No one can really tell me because no one there keeps records. All I have done, besides spending a lot of time in meetings talking about what we would like to do, is annually passing out a bouquet of flowers and giving an award to torchbearer winners, which are amazing, remarkable women who are very deserving of the award. But that's not, to me, I mean, it's a part of what the Commission for Women should be doing, but we have so many initiatives that we want to try to address and have not gotten steady support from the Civil Rights Commission. We have asked to be involved in the hiring of our executive director, which is the only staff person for the commission. And not only have we not had an opportunity to be involved, we've basically been told we're unwelcome in the process of hiring our own executive director. So this really was a frustration point of, in order for the Commission for Women to work and fulfill its mission, is a statutory commission the way we want to have it? Or would it be better to put it under maybe the LG's office or an independent commission so that we can operate more autonomously? So that was really it. It was really more of a discussion on how can we be better at delivering what we are supposed to. It was not about getting rid of it, but in order to get rid of it, I mean, since it's a statutory commission, any little change has to be done through a bill. I hope that kind of explains it. I wanted to get it to a more productive place so that, like I said, we have 15 remarkable women on the commission. They're all volunteers. They are very successful. They have great ideas that we spend a lot of time developing, all to just fall flat on its face because we can't get support.
Okay, thank you. I know this question was directed towards Representative Mayfield, but is there anyone else that has any comment on it before we move on? All right, seeing none. Ralph?
Okay, next we have Rachel. She's going to unmute and turn on her video.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to our legislators for taking the time to brief us and answer our questions this morning. My name is Rachel Guglielmo. I'm a volunteer with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and I'm concerned about the rising level of gun violence in our state. In Indiana, we had a 30% increase from 2010 to 2019, and that's compared to a 17% increase nationwide. We saw in our paper last week that here in Monroe County, just last year, there was a 52% increase in cases where a gun was used to perpetrate a crime. We have had a number of gun bills proposed in our legislature this year, and I want to express concern about two of them. House Bill 1369 proposes to revoke our handgun permitting system. At a hearing of the Public Policy Committee last Wednesday, our state police associations, including our Bloomington Chief of Police, Mike Dekoff, pleaded with legislators not to move forward with this proposal. One of them said that the impact on every community across our state would be devastating. And that's because they know that permitting works. Last year, state law enforcement processed 300,000 permits, 1,722 in Bloomington alone. And 28,000 of those permit requests were rejected. That means that 28,000 people who wanted to carry a loaded handgun in public exhibited red flags that gave local police serious cause for concern. That means they had a consequential police history, they had mental health issues, they had alcohol or drug abuse issues, they had been called in for domestic violence incidents, they were showing signs of suicidal ideation. 60% of gun deaths in Indiana are gun suicides. So that's the first bill I would like to ask for your position on. And the second one is Senate Bill 199, which would expand our existing Stand Your Ground law to expand the definition of reasonable force in self-defense to include pointing a loaded firearm at another person. Evidence from other states shows that Stand Your Ground laws lead to 150 more gun deaths every month. And the racial statistics on these bills is more than disturbing. White shooters with Black victims are deemed justified 5 times more often than the reverse. This bill encourages people to shoot first and ask questions later. In the midst of a gun violence epidemic alongside our COVID pandemic in our state, this is just throwing oil on the fire. So again, knowing all of this and knowing that surveys
Our time is limited.
show, sorry?
Our time is limited. We're supposed to be 1 minute per question.
I'm wrapping up. So knowing that surveys show that over 90% of Hoosiers support handgun permitting, I would be grateful if you could please share with us your position on the handgun permitting bill and also on Stand Your Ground. Thank you.
All right, legislators, our order this time for this question is Jeff, Shelley, Matt, and then Peggy. So Jeff, if you could kick us off.
Okay, so I've not seen the Senate bill, but I will read it. I can tell you, though, I was at the public policy meeting the other night, listening to testimony, and I called all of my sheriffs in my district. I have 4 counties. The main issue for them was the funding of their ammunition, their training, and also taking those permit dollars to use for safety apparel. I was assured that this bill that's moving, those dollars will be taken care of. And my sheriff said, if that is the case, we are fine. It'll be great to do that. We've also still kept in place what they call as a reciprocity permit process. And then really any individual who purchases a hand permit here in Indiana really does that so they can have the reciprocity in the other states that acknowledge those. You know, here in Indiana, you can keep your gun at the house. You can take your gun and go to practice. You can go to hunting. When you get in your car, you just have to, if you have no permit, you just got to make sure it's in a unreachable area and the bullets are separate. So the issue is, in my district and across Indiana, there was testimony that said that there is a delayed response of sometimes the average is 7-8 minutes. In other rural areas, it goes up 10 minutes plus. The thing is, the testimony from the officers, even one of the city officers, I think from Lafayette, the police chief, said that when asked a question, when he detains someone, his police staff detains someone in a criminal act that has a gun, if they're felons, of course, they have no permit. But it's the honest, law-abiding citizen that really sometimes gets in trouble just because they're transporting their gun and don't understand the ramifications of having the gun in reach and the bullets in it when they're maybe going to a training class. So there was a lot of women that was going, that was in testimony from trainers that they didn't know that all along a few of their women they were training were actually criminals because they were now carrying their gun improperly to go to take a training class. So I think it's a good bill. There's not, and you talk about the increase in violence. Well, let's look where that's happening. Across the nation, it's in Chicago, it's in Indianapolis. And when mayors pull police back and they don't prosecute, there was thousands and thousands of gun-related charges here in Indiana. And the police chiefs couldn't tell us if they followed through with criminal charges on those. And the percentage, I want to say, Peggy probably knows, it was less than 5% of those thousands of those that was carrying illegally that were felons or had other instances where they couldn't comply with the carry license, that no charges were filed. So I want to protect law-abiding citizens, and I'm protecting our community law enforcement agencies by making sure those dollars are fully funded and they get the reciprocity fees 100%. So as I listened to testimony, I didn't hear, there was a greater percentage that was in favor of these bills. I'm not talking about the Senate bill, but the House bills. So thank you.
Senator Yoder.
Thank you, Mary. I would say with the House bill, I do not support permitless carry. we need, I mean, right now we have so little in Indiana to address and reduce gun violence. And I would say it's not just Indianapolis. I mean, I appreciate the question and Rachel drawing attention to that the increase in gun violence is happening right here. And so I think that having those some protections, at least having to go through the permit process, is a good one. Regarding Senate Bill 199 and having stand your ground for a piece of property or for self-defense, which is currently, but this would extend it to property. I don't support that as well. I think it's, you know, anytime you can point a loaded gun is going to increase chances of, you know, we already see chances of gun violence happening that are accidents, and we see that right here in Monroe County. And I just think that stand your ground legislation extending to property, I can't help but think about that situation. And yes, it was New York City, but you know, wrongfully accusing someone of taking an iPhone and accusing somebody who had nothing to do with that. You know, being able to protect your privacy, your property. I'm having such an issue this morning with forming words. Protecting your property with a loaded weapon should have us all concerned. And so I don't support either of these pieces of legislation.
Thank you. Representative Pierce.
Thank you. Well, you know, the NRA is very fond of saying that the antidote for a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And I think all the permitting process does is make sure that the good guys have the guns and not a bunch of bad guys. And I don't think it's too big of a burden. You know, we have a real movement, a real kind of shift in the legislature where more and more people are essentially adopting the idea that we have all of these constitutional rights and zero responsibilities. You know, there are very few, if any, rights in our constitutions that are absolute, as much as people might like to think. We have a First Amendment right of free speech. You can't produce child pornography. You can't do obscenity. You can't libel people. You can't incite riots. I mean, there are limitations on these things. And people would like to believe that the Second Amendment is this just completely all rights and no responsibilities. And the courts really have not ruled that. They've given pretty broad birth to the whole thing, but there can be some reasonable gun safety laws. And I think having a permit process to make sure that we weed out people who are not qualified under our laws to actually have a concealed carry permit just makes sense. And so I would not be in favor of that legislation. Senate Bill 199, I haven't read the provisions, so I can't speak to it specifically, but I can just tell you that generally I do have a concern that these stand your ground laws really kind of promote vigilantism in a way. You know, people get the idea that they can kind of just take the law in their own hands in the name of protecting their property. And I think that's not a route we want to go. And so, you know, without having read the bill, just generally, I think those concepts don't tend to translate into good public policy.
Thank you. Representative Mayfield.
Yeah, on Senate Bill, is it 199, the pointing of a firearm? That it makes sense because right now, if you were trying to defend yourself and you unholstered your firearm and didn't use it, you would be guilty of pointing a firearm. So I think that when someone said it encourages the use, I think that the fact that if you won't be charged with pointing a firearm, then you know, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, if I pull it out, I actually have to use it in order to be not guilty. So I think that that's a flawed logic. Regarding the permitless carry, what that bill does is say that if you would have been issued a permit as a lawful person, This simply removes that requirement to get a permit. It does not make it legal for anyone who would not have received a permit if we had that process in place to get a gun. You said there was like 28,000 were rejected. I'm curious what they've told me, or what they've said in testimony is, so then 28,000 people lied on their federal form, and that is a felony in itself. And yet not one of those 28,000 people were prosecuted for lying on a federal form, which is a felony. I went to one of the hearings. We had this debate a couple years ago in the summer study. So I asked the state police if I could attend the appeals hearings for the people who had been denied for one of those reasons. And there were 5 people there. All of them knew why I was there. So all of them allowed me to sit because there were some mental health, health issues that were being discussed. And all 5 of them were issued permits as a result, because of the circumstances that were behind the reason of the original denial. So I support the bill. And it will be coming up to the floor, next week. We'll be amending and voting it out of committee on Monday. It'll probably be up for second reading on Tuesday, and then final vote on Thursday.
Okay, thank you very much. And just a reminder, when you pose your questions, please be just very direct. It's not a time to make, public statements or engage in debate as part of this forum. And with that said, Ralph, who's next in the queue?
Okay, the next question comes from Sherry Frank, and I will read it for her. It is brief. She says, please discuss TANF requirements being discussed as mentioned by Peggy Mayfield and Jeff Ellington. How will these help or hurt the needy to meet their needs, especially now in COVID?
Okay, great. And the order this time is Shelley, Matt, Peggy, and Jeff.
Well, the increase in TANF would be very targeted dollars to help those who need it most. And we have an increased TANF in Indiana in quite some time. And so it does sort of in a very targeted way, put the dollars where they're most needed. Some of the research about TANF, it can actually, depending on how a state allocates those dollars, it can exacerbate poverty where it doesn't actually do what it needs to do. And I've been looking at that and a little bit concerned about how that money will be allocated, but Indiana certainly does need to do more to address the issue of poverty, and I did support it on the Senate side.
Okay, great. Matt?
Yeah, I think that I haven't had a chance to really read that bill carefully, but I think that what it's trying to get at is the which I think Jeff mentioned, this basic idea that you kind of have a cliff. So if you have somebody who's, getting assistance and they begin to get some traction, maybe they get a little bit of education, some training, certification or something, they get a job and they begin to get some income, what can happen is you get a few dollars over the limits and then you lose all of your benefits. And ironically, it kind of almost disincentivizes trying to get up that ladder. At least it makes it hard on you. So I think, as Jeff mentioned, that the idea is that maybe we can get to a system where you kind of have more of a step down. And so as people are able to increase their incomes and get better jobs and kind of advance, they wouldn't just immediately lose their assistance. The assistance would kind of step down, and with the hope that we can get them to a really, good paying job with the benefits and that we'd all like to have that would really allow you to raise your family. So that's my understanding. I'm not on the Ways and Means Committee, so I haven't had a chance to hear testimony on that bill. But I think that's what it's attempting to do.
Thanks, Peggy.
Yeah, Matt did a really good job of explaining it. It is to soften the blow when you start to cross that maximum income level threshold before you start losing your social benefits. We addressed it partially last year when, you know, we have a lot of high school students who are going under CTE and they do internships. And if they're paid internships, for that high schooler to earn money, the entire family was losing some of the benefits. So we kind of took that out. Other one-time monies, like if you work an election, we have a lot of unemployed people who would be available, but they won't work because they're afraid it's going to affect their benefits. So, if we can exempt some of those types of things, like the census workers, we did it for them. If you wanted to work, then that wouldn't count against your maximum allowed earnings. So just like Matt said, we want to soften the blow so it's not such a cliff and it won't disincentivize anyone to, try to better themselves.
Okay, Jeff, did you have anything to add?
Just real quick, some points. One, it just changes the income eligibility, raises it up so you can qualify if you get a raise. It takes away the opportunity for the state to deduct on a percentage basis, which is big into that aspect. So it throws it back into a step program, but it also takes care of the cost of living, which will be calculated through the Social Security increase. Whereas before, I don't think there was, and not reading the bill in detail, I don't think there was that part in there in the early years. So this will give them an annual percentage raise based on Social Security raise, which was there before. So it does a lot, but there's always more that can be done for those families in need of services. So I'll try to be an advocate for those up there, especially making sure we have mental health services throughout Indiana and expand that. Thanks.
Okay, great. Ralph, who's next in the queue?
Okay, I'm here. The next one is a question from Dave Askins, and he has had trouble with his audio, so he asked me to read it regarding HB 1114, which says, quote, "A municipality shall not regulate design elements of residential structures," unquote. Bloomington regulates design structures now and is planning to add some design element regulations to one of the new zoning districts that Bloomington has defined in its Unified Development Ordinance. Is this bill going anywhere? And if so, what is there to like about this bill? Do you think this signals the state legislature's opposition to municipalities using form-based codes? Can you imagine the state legislature prohibiting the creation of zoning districts that have only single-family housing as a permitted use?
All right, and the order this time will be Matt, Peggy, Jeff, and Shelley.
Yeah, that bill has been moving, but I think it's hit some snags. So I was just looking to try to see, it might have even dropped off the calendar. So I've been hearing that there's some opposition, even within the Republican caucus on that. But obviously, if people know me, I'm a pretty strong proponent of local control. And, this is an example of where, not every community is the same. And whether you like it or not, when you live in urban areas, the things that happen on the property next door to you can impact your property values and things overall. And so, many communities try to use their planning and zoning to make sure you have compatible uses and that things don't happen next door to property that might have negative impacts on the property that's already there. And so this bill would get in the way of that. So I would not support it. It's interesting. We have 3 or 4, maybe 5 members of the House who are in the building, business. They're home builders basically, and they've kind of become the point persons on the legislation that moves in that area. And, overall, the general thrust of that legislation is try to deregulate as much as possible. Sometimes under the argument that it creates additional expense, which limits the ability to have affordable housing. I'm not sure if I'm buying into that argument fully. But for whatever reason, there's, year after year, kind of a real push to limit building codes and anything that might put some restrictions on development. And so I think that's what's going on with this bill. But I think it is running into a little bit of trouble. So I don't know if it's going to keep moving or not.
Thanks, Peggy.
Everyone's screaming for affordable housing, and yet so many of the cities and towns and even counties want to put restrictions on what that housing can look like, and all that does is drive the cost up. It's not adding anything to the value of the, I mean, the livability of the house, because this is all aesthetics. It's not about building code. It's not about safety. It's all about aesthetics. So you can say, that you have too much negative space on the front side of your house. You need more windows. I like, we want a steeper roof. We don't want you to paint it this color. We only want garages that load from the side or the back, which, it affects where you can put things on a lot line. There was one particular area that concerned me, and I voiced my opinion, was the inability to control minimum square footage, because I don't necessarily think that that's an aesthetic feature. But when developers are proposing their developments to the the planning and zoning, that's all part of the negotiations. If you were to build a home, say in an established area, what they call an infill house, so you've got, down a city street and there's a vacant lot, current codes might not match what was in place when that neighborhood was built. So your house might stand out. Or even if you have a house and you want to add an outbuilding to it, the current aesthetic requirements might mean that outbuilding's not going to look anything like your house, which is, you kind of want them to look similar. So I think that they are still working on addressing some of those concerns. It is stalled. I don't think it's dead. And so I'm still looking forward to seeing that. There have been some concerns. I think we've all been willing to say, hey, if you can fix this, I can fully support your bill. And so we're just kind of waiting to see what's coming up out of those discussions.
Thank you. Jeff, did you have anything to add on this?
I think Peggy explained it pretty well. One of the examples was this, for your information, this doesn't concern any deed restricted property, any HOAs. It doesn't deal with any historic districts. These are all outside of that. These are private property, individual stuff. Doesn't deal with commercial buildings, just, I think, residential type structures, unless it's for housing, which would be apartments. It doesn't deal with, as Peggy said, building safety. As a fireman, that's very important to me. We have state standards we have to meet. But what it does, I look at all you gotta do is look in your paper. Hundreds of millions of dollars that cities and towns are receiving, not only across Indiana, but across our nation, to deal with affordable housing. We, all of you as a taxpayer, are paying for those types of structures. But yet the same people who's getting hundreds of millions of dollars are making it more restrictive and higher cost in design, just for a look outside of a historic district, outside of HOAs, outside of deed restricted property. It's got some changes that probably will take place first in the middle of the week. There'll probably be, I heard, maybe some amendments, maybe some changes to make it, a little less aggressive. But I will say, they always look and say it's a builder. They're a builder associated. They got ties to development. Well, look at the health department. They're bringing medical issues to us as Indiana to be cost savings. It's going to have an effect on hospitals, or insurance companies, or medical providers, because they're experienced. You look at our Natural Resource Committee. You have a lot of experience on there with those that deal with natural resource industries and issues. Every committee has someone who is an expert or has ties to that committee. I just think it's political, and it really it brings some people to have deaf ears when you start talking and using those examples, because it's in every committee. You have experienced people. So thank you.
All right, thanks. Shelley.
Yes, it is in every committee, and just because it's in every committee doesn't necessarily make it right or good for Indiana. So I would say on the Environmental Affairs Committee, it's been fascinating because most of the individuals on that committee, I haven't seen a real priority in actually protecting the environment. It's been more pushing back against the environment. And I would say I've also discovered that there is this session just many bills that are about taking away local control. I mean, we just voted, the Senate just voted to override the governor's veto from last session, Senate Bill 148, that became law, and then the governor vetoed it. And it was, that bill provided some tenant protections to people, and it seemed to be a direct response to Marion County and the Indianapolis City, the Common Council there, who had passed some tenant protections in conversation with the landlords and the landlord association, trying to come up with reasonable protections that worked for both parties. And on the same day that that was passed, this language was inserted into a bill to remove any local ordinances for tenant protections. And the governor vetoed it. And in this session, we brought it back up and voted to override the governor's veto. I didn't support that. I think it's a misstep to take away that local control, because not every community looks the same. What Bloomington needs in terms of tenant protections and relationships between landlord and tenants might look very different than what Spencer needs. So I think it's really important sort of to go back to what Matt was saying, that we leave that control up to local communities to be able to decide what those needs are. So watch out for that coming over to the House side very soon.
Okay, thank you all. Looks like we're pushing 11 o'clock. I think we have time for one more question, maybe two. Who's up next, Ralph?
Okay, the next one is a question from Marge Faber, who asked me to read it. It says, if private schools and charters are potentially getting more money, will there be more appropriate and greater oversight of the schools our state students and money will be giving them?
Okay, the order this time, we saw that Representative Ellington had to leave, so we'll start with Representative Mayfield, then Senator Yoder, and then Representative Pierce.
Would you mind repeating it?
Okay, if schools, basically, if private schools and charters are potentially getting more money, will there be more appropriate and greater oversight of the schools?
Okay, charters are already audited and held to the same standard because they are considered public schools. The private school side of it, there's a limit to it because their books are not, they are not a public entity. So while the state does require alignment in many areas, we don't get into their overall books. We can ask about how they're applying their education funds, but we can't, they're usually a, what do you want to call it? A ministry of a larger organization. So we don't have access or don't have the jurisdiction to get into that larger organization.
All right, Senator Yoder.
I'm not seeing more oversight that's being put into some of this, the language that's looking to expand the voucher program. I would push back a little bit and just say charter schools aren't even required to non-discrimination clauses. So they can discriminate, they can receive public dollars and discriminate in staff and in students, whether it's sexual orientation or gender identity. So when I see that the voucher program is looking to expand in Indiana, when we are talking about these debit cards and these educational savings accounts, we are having an issue in Indiana providing oversight and checks and balances to the current charter school system, and we're seeing failings there. Expanding it to include these educational savings accounts is going to be, I think, lead to greater exposures of either fraud or just loss of money. In states where the educational savings plans have been enacted, there is evidence of fraud. And I know I've read that there will be these protections put in place and audits that will be put in place, but those audits, if they're happening now, they're still not catching the fraud that's happening in Indiana. So I'm skeptic.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear the architects of the voucher program and that kind of funneling of public money into these private schools really do not want any significant oversight. They just feel that those schools should have the right to do what they want to do, even if they take government money. And so we've gotten in a situation now where we are using tax dollars, everybody's money, to fund schools that have discriminatory policies. And we've had debates about this now before, actually some pretty ugly debates, related to schools that have fired counselors and people because they're in same-sex marriages. And that's considered conflict of their religion, which, they have the right to have that religious view, but I don't think they should have the right to take state money then to impose those religious views using our tax dollars. And so those are the kinds of problems that are developing. You're really going to risk getting the government entangled with these religious institutions that are running schools. And that's why I think that it's a better policy to keep that separate. Even on virtual charter schools, we've had lots of problems with those. And we did a little bit, I guess, last year, the year before, but not really a whole lot of significant oversight on that. So I think you have to understand that the general philosophy that's driving all of this is that instead of funding, quote, government schools, we should just give the money to the parents and let them go out and shop for education for their kids. And if they shop at a religious school, a private school, maybe a public school, then okay, they made the choice. And that's what they want to get. I think they really want the ultimate endpoint of this current trajectory of policy is get to a point where parents get handed money and they're told to go find some education. And at that point, the theory is that the competition, people voting with their feet, will force the bad schools out and the good schools will prosper, and that will solve all our problems. And we won't have to fund this kind of infrastructure of public schools. And that has a lot of consequences that I don't think we fully thought through.
If I could follow up just as a statement to what I heard from Shelley and Matt both, was that we're funding schools. Indiana has made it the policy over the last several years. We do not fund schools, we fund students. And so, and that's been upheld by the Indiana Supreme Court, that the money follows the child. So this constant discussion of we're funding schools, it's not that. We are funding the families who are sending their kids to approved institutions. So we're already where Matt kind of said, this trajectory of we're just going to give the money to the families. Yeah, that was a policy decision that was made back in, 11, 10, something like that.
Well, I wish we had time to continue this discussion. It's been a really great exchange today, and I personally have learned a lot, and I hope everyone here has too. I know we had some other questions lined up, but it is 11 o'clock, so we'll need to wrap up today's legislative update. You can contact legislators directly, of course, and our next legislative update will be on Saturday, March 6th at the same time, 9:30 in the morning. So I hope you can attend then as well. If you'd like to follow the work of the Indiana General Assembly, their website is a great resource, iga.in.gov. There's a wealth of information, and you can track the bills there. You can also track the bills through local media that covers the State House. And the League of Women Voters will be providing a follow-up email with some additional information as well, so look for that. In closing, I would like to thank Ralph Shaw for making the arrangements for this program and all the other League members who assisted. Please check out the CATS schedule for any rebroadcast of this session, and thanks to CATS for taping this. Finally, thanks to all the legislators who came today, Senator Shelley Yoder, Representative Matt Pearson, Representative Peggy Mayfield, and Representative Jeff Ellington. We really appreciate your time for sharing information about the legislature. Thank you all for attending, and that's a wrap. Bye-bye.